Hi there, Malcolm here with my 98th Booktube video, and today I'll be bringing you my wrap-up video for May. I've quite an enormous pile there, so let's get started. First up, I finished Star Wars XWing Starfighters of Adumar by Aaron Alston. This is book 9 in the XWing series. I'd started the previous month, but needed a bit more time to finish it. In this one, Wedge Antilles and his X-Wing pilots are sent on a diplomatic mission to Adumar, where the people there celebrate pilots and dogfighting. And there they find themselves pitted up against the Imperial representatives, where both sides have to try and curry favour with the people of Adumar because they want their technology. You'd have thought by the 9th book of a series it might have got a little bit tired by now. In this case you'd be wrong. This was an excellent look at different cultures, where Wedge and his team have to try to conform to the native way of doing things, but find a lot of the time going up against their own beliefs and ethics. Filled with some really good characters and some very devious plot twists. There was a lot more in here than I was bargaining for. Really enjoyed it. Booktastic. Next up I then finished Star Wars Tales Volume 4. These graphic novels feature a lot of short stories set through any time during the Star Wars saga, including Knights of the Old Republic, and any time throughout. Pre-Disney, of course. Some of the stories may fit canonically into the established timeline, again pre-Disney, and some are just a bit of fun and aren't even supposed to try and fit in. Now in previous videos I've gone through every single story and listed them, but with 13 books to get through, that's going to be a huge video because I've got another volume later on. So I'll just give you some highlights. The first few stories all feature Mace Windu quite heavily, so if you're a Mace Windu fan, really great stuff. And one quite an important story called Children of the Force actually looks at the repercussions of the Jedi Order taking babies strong with the Force. To some it's a great honour, but to most they're just taking their children. And it does a very nice look at that aspect of what a Jedi is and the Jedi Order and how they're viewed. So that's really good. And then there's Tides of Terror, featuring two of my favourite Jedi, Kit Fisto and Ayla Secura, on Camino trying to deal with a biological emergency. Beautifully illustrated and depicts the Jedi having far more layers to them than you originally thought, particularly as in the films they're blinking you miss them characters. First Impressions sees a young Leia's first introduction to the Emperor with her father Bail. So a nice little bit more of the pre-film Leia, some of her backstory there. The previous time we saw some of that was in the Princess Diaries, which is also very good. And then there's another Leia story called The Other, which looks at why she's reluctant to pick up a lightsaber and just how much of a kick-ass character she is when she does. The artwork's a bit basic on that one, but it's still a really good tale. The rest are okay, or quite good. There's no real bad ones in this, with varying artwork styles. The 2-page story, The Long Bad Day, featuring Darth Vader just after the Death Star blows up in his TIE Advance ×1, with Obi-Wan Kenobi visiting him as a Force ghost and making him punch out various parts of his control panel. That's quite funny. All in all, a really good collection of stories, some very interesting art styles in here. Booktastic. And then it's on to the book of the month, which this month was The Enemy by Charlie Higson. I have done a separate video on this, so I'll leave a link to that below. So go and check that out if you want to know what I thought of that one. And then after that, I then read Star Wars, The Crystal Star by Vonda McIntyre. At this point, Princess Leia is now in charge of the New Republic, and her 3 children are kidnapped. And she goes on a quest to try and track them down. Meanwhile, Luke and Han are still following trails to find some hidden Jedi. And we also get to see Jaina and Jason as actual characters now. Before they're only children and referenced or just there to cry and want sweeties, but they've actually got personalities now, and you see a lot of the adventure from their point of view as well. Personally, I prefer the bits with Jaina and Jason in it. I really enjoyed meeting these characters for the first time properly, seeing how their relationship is with each other and the determination to get through problems. Leia's story was also quite good, and her determination to find her children. I wasn't as keen on Luke and Han's story, as most of it is just pottering about, not really doing very much. Needless to say, the story does pull all 3 strands together for a finale, where it did go into that pseudo science fiction-y type weird collection of things that happen, and it's just a case of, okay, I have no idea what's going on here. And there are certain aspects we've not seen elsewhere in the Star Wars universe before or since, that I'm aware of anyway, which I found were a little unnecessary. But all in all, it was a pretty strong story. I did enjoy it a lot and buy it. From one franchise to the next, my next book was Doctor Who, Prisoner of the Daleks by Trevor Baxendale. Set during the time that the 10th Doctor is bumming about the universe on his own, and this time he ends up on a ship with a bunch of Dalek bounty hunters. people who hunt down Daleks. It's the first great human-Dalek war. It's been going on for quite a long time now, and the Doctor gets stuck in the middle of it all and becomes a prisoner of the Daleks. This book quite surprised me. A lot of this series they're okay, and there's nothing special about a lot of them. This one stood out for me. I don't get that excited about Daleks, but I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the characters while they lasted. I think one of my main critiques with this one is the more developed and likeable a character is, you think, oh, I can really root for this one. Oh, they're dead. Okay, moving on. That happened a few times, which is a bit annoying, but then no one is safe with the Doctor around. But yeah, really good story with a nice explosive ending. Buy it. And then my final book from my planned reading was Riotous Assembly by Tom Sharp. This is a farcical look at apartheid, which in lieu of what's going on in America right now, couldn't really be more appropriate. This was a reread, and I was really looking forward to reading it again, having enjoyed it a lot the first time round. But that was a few years ago now, and having grown up a bit more perhaps, was a bit wary that this might be a bit too offensive or ringing all the wrong bells. Was pleasantly surprised to find that this really looked at racism and the apartheid regime at its core and tore it to shreds beautifully. This was written by a man who actually lived through apartheid. Okay, he was on the white side of it all, but he was dead against it. This book was one of his ways of protesting against it, and he was so successful about it, he was actually exiled from South Africa for his views on apartheid. So a man who wasn't willing to mince his words, and he stood up for what was right and paid the price for that. But this book really does tear it apart, told from the point of view of the brutish regime, where Police Commandant Van Heerden finds himself with the duty of dealing with the case where an elderly white aristocrat guns down her black cook and lover on the front lawn of her estate, filled with the flippant attitudes of the times. Times haven't changed that much, unfortunately, as the commandant tries to do everything in his power to ensure that she gets off scot-free, because, in his words, it was only a black man. And the commandant's biggest fear, of course, is failure, because that could mean the end of the status quo and the collapse of apartheid. Now, like I said, this is a farce. This is absolutely hilarious, very, very rude and crude, and does not paint white people in a good light at all. On the surface, can be enjoyed for the silliness that it is, but if you're willing to look a little bit deeper, and you don't have to look that hard, it is pretty blatantly obvious. This is really cutting satire on a regime that is gone, but is not in the realms of impossibility of coming back somewhere at some point. So I think this is actually an important book, particularly for today's audience. Booktastic. But warning, it is very, very of its time, with the attitudes and the language used. If you're easily offended, you have been warned. I mean, it's important to read, but just be aware that there'll be buttons here that may be pushed repeatedly and heavily, and then again. Now, back in November, I started reading a book to my wife. We didn't know what it was about, but as we got through it, things started happening, and then things started happening in the real world, which were scarily similar. That book is Wanderers by Chuck Wendig. Now, Sabrina and I did do a joint video reviewing this, so I'll leave a link to that below. It's also on her channel as well, which I'll link to. It's the same video, it's just two different accounts with it. Really good book, but don't read it if you don't like what's going on in the world right now, pandemic-wise, because it's not exactly escapism in that regard. But go check that video out for more about that. I then read a Goosebumps Series 2000, Book 3, Creature Teacher by R.L. Stine. I was very excited about this one because this is the penultimate Goosebumps book in the house, and I've really not been enjoying them lately. Occasionally there has been a gem which was, okay, that was quite good. And the first book was really good. When they missed, they've been really irritating as well. This was a nice surprise. This was actually a lot better than a lot of the books I've had read recently in the Goosebumps series. And this one, a young lad is sent to boarding school, a nice big posh school, where it's very clear very, very quickly that his teacher is a monster. And she's got the class competing against each other because the one who's at the bottom of the class by the end of the week is going to get eaten. Now, I was hoping that the twist at the end was just as a motivator to get them working hard, because it worked brilliantly. But no, it was a genuine, I'm going to try and eat you. As usual, the adults in this are stupid as hell, which is always a bit annoying, but you get used to it. But gratefully, there wasn't the irritating bully aspect, which seems to feature in these books quite a lot. So that was a good miss as well. Yeah, one of the better ones, worth reading. And so from that one to the last one we've got, hooray, Goosebumps Series 2000, Book 4, Invasion of the Body Squeezers, Part 1. This, I suppose, is a take on the Invasion of the Body Snatchers type story, except that doesn't really take place, and all that really does happen is the main character runs around screaming his head off like a lunatic and is treated as such. A complete shambles, a real mess, an unlikable main character who makes every single wrong decision you can make to ensure that nobody's going to believe you that aliens are coming to take over the world. And then some weird alien mind control stuff happens as well, but that's not really explained or used in any useful way. And then it just stops because this is part 1. So if you want to really know more and actually find out what the hell's going on, like anything, then you need a book 2. Having read book 1 and hated it, I have no inclination to pick up book 2. Boring, just plain dull. After that, I then read Star Wars Tales Volume 5. So more short stories in and around the Star Wars universe. So notable stories in this one include Dark Journey, which is a very dark, illustrated and dark themed story about a Jedi on the hunt for a serial killer. So very gritty, very grainy, with lots of stark red colour for blood and death. And that's quite a clever one, very psychological as well. Totally very different to everything we've had before, and since actually. Yeah, good one. Quite a few Boba Fett stories, and so if you're a Boba Fett fan, then great, and I did enjoy them. 2 standout ones for me from that was his first mission with his father. So that was good, nicely illustrated. And then a much later one, set during the New Republic, when he's hunting Han Solo again. And no matter what Han Solo does to him, he just keeps on coming. He seems to be an unstoppable machine. But that's a really clever story. I enjoyed that one. And those 2 were The Way of the Warrior and Revenants. There's a fun cartoony one called The Rebel Club, a spin on The Breakfast Club, where the rebel gang are in detention with Darth Vader presiding. It's just silly, but I love the fun artwork with it. Yeah, it was good fun. Into the Great Unknown, when the Millennium Falcon goes further than it's ever gone before and ends up crash landing on planet Earth about 100 years ago, and Han is properly killed by a bunch of Native Americans. And a bit later on, an archaeologist goes to the area and the hunt for the fabled Sasquatch. Chewie finds the Millennium Falcon and the skeleton of Han Solo. Indiana Jones looks on with a familiar feeling. No, I love that one. That was good fun. But otherwise than that, there were okay ones. There were quite a lot of weaker ones as well. Some really daft ones. A couple of Jar Jar Binks stories which really lampooned how daft Jar Jar Binks was, even more so than he actually was. And so I'd say buy it. It's good, but wasn't as great as the previous ones. And after that is my first ever point horror, Trick or Treat, by Richie Tankersley Cusick. And this one, a teenage girl and her dad move into a spooky old house with his new bride and her son. And after a couple of scary incidents which completely terrified this young girl, Martha, the 2 adults then abscond off to Hawaii for their 3-week honeymoon, leaving stepbrother and stepsister alone in this spooky old house in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Apart from the complete devoid of any parenting responsibilities whatsoever, this was a really enjoyable story. I found that the tension moved on nicely. It kept a lot of the characterizations of those around Martha a little bit vague, so you didn't quite know who was the perpetrator, if there was one, or if it was a genuine haunting. As more and more things are uncovered, you still don't really know if it's a haunting or person, and a pretty good idea which one it was going to be, though not necessarily the who, or the what or the why. And the ending was a bit of a letdown, as it literally was just plain nuts. But for my first foray into point horror, I was pleasantly surprised, head and shoulders better than the Goosebumps series. Looking forward to trying more of these. Worth reading. And finally, I then read Orbitsville Departure by Bob Shaw. This is the sequel to Orbitsville, where 200 years after the discovery of this Dyson sphere, in which the landmass equivalent of 5 billion Earths exist, much of Earth has been depopulated as they've all moved here. But Earth still needs a little bit of policing, and a man from Orbitsville goes to Earth to do that, and his wife and very young son come and join him, but are promptly mind-wiped by a criminal, leaving him caring for 2 infantile beings, one in an adult body and one still pretty much little more than a baby, but their personalities have gone. And he's left picking up pieces of his family and trying to find out who did it. As the reader, we know who did it, we actually watch it happen and why it happened, but we have to watch the detective try and put the pieces together after running down the wrong route for quite a lot of the time. Only 250 pages in length, but it packs a hell of a lot in here. Really impressed with the density of the story. I enjoyed the investigation. I enjoyed the jumps back to Orbitsville, so the developments going on there. The picture on the front cover is a clue, if you know anything about Orbitsville, leading to a pretty crazy ending. Pretty typical of this sort of science fiction story type. I won't give away more than that. but certainly what went on in here, I'd usually find in a much, much thicker book. And so I was impressed that we had a very readable story with so much packed into it. I think perhaps there was one too many high-minded ideas in here to get lost in. And certainly when one of them was introduced, I was thinking, well, what's the relevance of that? Kind of gets answered, but I did think it was a little wishy-washy, particularly for a science fiction story dealing with Dyson spheres and space. But that little grab aside, I really, really enjoyed this. Buy it if you can get hold of a copy. There is a third one in the series. I don't have it. Just tried to get it online. Not easy. But another hit from Bob Shaw. Thank you, Bob Shaw. So there you go, 13 books. I think it's a very successful month for me. Now, for the first time in a couple of years, I've actually read everything on my TBR pile. I hadn't planned on reading Orbitsville until this month, so that's how well I did. So have you read any of those? Any questions about any of those? Then feel free to comment down below. So I just had a phone call, so about half an hour later than the last section that we had for footage. Alternatively, have you got a series that you've really enjoyed reading? You've read books 1 and 2, but can you get hold of book 3 or 4? You know, what series do you really enjoy but can't get hold of those books that will complete it? Answers below, please. But as usual, if you have nothing nice to say, then please keep it to yourself. Until next time, see you later.